Hello everyone and welcome back to the X-Ring Part 2 of how to get your junior shooter started in precision rimfire shooting. So I've got a lot of really good examples for you. So let's say you have made that decision. You want to get them shooting. What works and what doesn't work? Okay, so guys, here's an example here. This is a Savage Mark II and it's a 22 caliber. This is a 26-inch barrel with a suppressor on it. It has a Nikon 3-9 on here. While you can go out and shoot and have a good time with this, you're not going to be very competitive. Now, if you're just getting your junior shooter started, there's nothing wrong with this. It's a little long, it's a little heavy, and the optic's not going to be right for what they need to do. You could probably have fun and get away with it in NRL 22, but definitely not X or PRS rimfire. And why not? Well, first off, the optic. This is going to be very limiting because it is just a standard crosshair. I don't have external turrets. I could unscrew this, but you're not going to have time, and I guarantee you the tracking won't be really good on it to take a coin and to try to turn this. So it's not going to work really well for you. The other thing is it is a little long, and before I get too crazy talking about suppressors, the majority of competitors don't shoot with suppressors. I love suppressors more than about anyone else, and I wish I would shoot them on PRS and NRL 22X matches, but it's been shown to me and told to me to just go ahead and leave those at home and just run a thread protector or just a barrel that doesn't even have threads on it. So this is going to go out of the way. And so guys, what I've done is I've got examples of everything, just barreled actions. This is a CZ455. This is one of the first ones we learned how to use after the RPR. We dressed it up a little bit, just had a wooden stock on it. And CZ457s and 455s are great platforms. The thing about divisions, it has to be modern manufacturing. So you wouldn't be able to classify this as, let's say you find a 455, an old one, they won't go off the MSRP. I think it has to be modern manufacturing. So let's pretend it has a wood stock on here, okay? The CZs, like the 457, is a great option. One of the biggest things about it, one of the biggest advantages, is the ability to switch out the barrel yourself. At the bottom here, you have two little grub screws. And all you have to do is unscrew those. You can pull this barrel out, put a new one in. So if you wanted to go with an aftermarket barrel, you could do that. You're going to bump yourself out of factory or base or production or base division. But the reason I wanted to show you guys this was the very first thing is if you go with a CZ, you guys see that Area 419 base? That is a 30 minute of angle base. 30 minutes of angle is really going to be optimal for whatever platform you're using. Now, try not to go much more than 30 because you're going to be limited on what you can do based on the internal adjustment of the optics. If you have a Ruger Precision Rimfire, an RPR rimfire, it already comes with 30 minutes of angle. So a lot of these manufacturers know that 30 is kind of like the sweet spot for it. But if you're buying a barreled action, you don't have a base, or if you have a CZ like this with a dovetail, Area 419 does sell these, and you have some options of going with like a 20-minute or a 30-minute of angle base. It is going to put everything up a little higher, so just keep that in mind. Switching triggers out on barreled actions are actually very simple, especially if it's like a Remington 700 footprint like this Bergara. It's as easy as on the bottom here, guys. You see those holes? You can actually see one right here that's kind of empty and one right here. You can actually drive those pins out. They're taper pins. And what you can do is just switch out to your favorite trigger, whether it's Trigger Tech, Huber Concepts, Timney, doesn't matter. It's usually pretty easy, but make sure you proof it out and you have it adjusted. This one actually has a 20-minute of angle base. That's all I could find at the time. And this is the Bergara Carbon. So having the carbon barrel is a good option if your junior shooter can't manage the weight. However, going with a steel barrel I think is going to be a better option because I actually competed with this and I did notice some stringing. Once this carbon starts to get hot, you get a little more vertical dispersion in there. Your shots start going higher and lower. So this would be a Bergara B14R rimfire. Steel barrel, comes with this chassis. It's a great chassis. You've got adjustable length of pull. You have an adjustable cheek riser, so this will help quite a bit. It might not adjust high enough for your junior's needs, but there's tricks around that and lengthening these posts here. So I do have the blue tape around it because what we're going to do is for this series, I'm going to take this Bergara, and what we're going to do is we're going to drop it into an open division chassis, and we'll see how it does. We'll actually mount a scope on it. We'll show you all of that. So the first thing is, remember, 30-minute of angle base is what your preference is on the base. As far as the stock or the chassis, if you go with something like this, remember you're not going to have that ARCA rail. On the wood stock for the CZ455 that I have, or if you had a 457, you're not going to have that ARCA rail either. But you could always buy something like this MDT. This MDT was actually made for the CZ455, and that's actually what was in here, like this. And now I have an M-lock, I have an adjustable cheek riser, which I didn't have on the CZ. On the wood stock, I have an adjustable length of pull. I have a little bag rider, and this is very lightweight. It is aluminum. On the side here, you're going to see I have a magazine holder, so that's going to get me to the next topic. If you watched the video on part 1, you saw Ella kind of moving very quickly, and you say, well, why is she rushing? On most of these stages, your average par time is going to be about 90 seconds. Sometimes it might be 120 seconds. But a minute and a half goes by very quickly when you're engaging 8 to up to 15 targets. So it's not unlimited rounds, guys. If it's an 8-shot stage, you can have 10 in your magazine, but you're only allowed to shoot 8 shots. That's it, usually. It's very rare they're going to give you unlimited rounds. So that brings us to the CZ. The CZ uses these little polymer mags like this. This is a 10-rounder. And yes, that's a live round, no big deal. But 10 rounds means that on an 8-round stage, you're going to have an extra 2 in there. A 10-round stage, which is quite common, you won't have any extras. So there are companies, this one's made by AOD, I think it's Anarchy Outdoors. It's a +2. It's a 3D printed extension, gives you 12 rounds. If it's a 15-round stage, you're just going to have to do a mag change. There's just no way around that. The Bergara, on the other hand, uses full-size magazines. So this is AICS patterned. It looks like a regular AICS magazine, but it's for 22. This will give you more of a feel for a true centerfire rifle, and it works really well. Once again, you're going to be limited to a 10-rounder. However, there is another company, AJ Sporting. They do +2 extensions, so that's going to make this a 12-rounder. So this will give you an idea of what you're up against when it comes to mag changes. Now, of course, with Voodoo and some of the other manufacturers like Remex, those type of guns, you can get 12 and 15 rounders because they know that's how the game is played. Hopefully, Bergara will start manufacturing some higher capacity magazines because it would definitely help out quite a bit. But let's go back to that wood stock. Let's say we buy this Bergara B14R rimfire. It's a great setup, great setup. You can do everything you want, but you're not going to have that ARCA rail. You're just going to have sling swivel studs, so you might use something like a Harris bipod, but not having that ARCA, I'm not going to say it's going to hurt you because you don't have to have it, but if you wanted to have it, you can buy things like this by Area 419. It's a very thin ARCA rail, and what you can do is simply mount it. You'll have to do a little bit of drilling, but you can mount it on there. But something like that MDT chassis, this was actually what was made for it. This is an M-lock configuration, and it gave us a way to have an ARCA rail in here, and it does sit flush when it's in there. So you do have plenty of options. I'm not telling you to throw a ton of money at this, I'm just showing you what you could do. So 30-minute of angle rail, a decent scope with external turrets, whether you go with something like a Night Force or a Burris or a Steiner. Those are big money optics. Some names that you see quite often out there that's more budget friendly would be things like Athlon and Arkin. Those are used quite heavily in rimfire shooting. Apparently they track well and they do well. So this series is going to be very long, folks. We're going to do everything from building this Bergara up. We're going to turn it into an open rifle because if you buy this, you're looking at that $1,000 MSRP. That's going to leave me about $500 to spend on an optic. I don't have one of those optics that would work on this, so we're going to just turn it into an open gun. So first thing you need to make sure of is that you have good torque wrenches. Whether you're using fix-it sticks or the Borka kit like I use, I do sell these on my website. I'm the only distributor in the US. You can go to xringcustoms.com, and I have a lot of different things like the magazine holder and two-shot holders that are made in the USA for these applications. Figured there was a need for it, so that's why I did it. So on this Bergara, the very first thing I'm going to do is take it out of the chassis. It's very simple. All you have to do is take out 2 action screws forward of the magazine well and behind the trigger guard, and we're just going to take this out. So let's go ahead and do that. And a lot of this I'm not going to be able to show on the channel because YouTube would say it's manufacturing or making one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this Bergara B14R with a steel barrel into an XLR Element 4 chassis. Stay tuned. All right, so on this B14R, we've done nothing but remove the 2 action screws. You can take your mag well out now. Once the mag well comes out, or your bottom metal, then we can just take the action out. We're going to take this and drop it into the Element chassis. All we need is the front and rear action screw. Now, while the trigger on the Bergara is really nice, since I'm going ahead and going into open division, I'll go ahead and upgrade the trigger. You can use names like Trigger Tech or Timney, or in this case, a Huber Concepts. And then all we're going to do now is take a rear action screw and a front action screw. The long one usually goes in the rear and the short one goes in the front. What we'll do is we will take those and just kind of get them started into the action itself. All right, guys, so these are loose now. What we're going to do now is we're going to insert a magazine and we're going to place it in here. Nothing has been tightened. Then what we'll do is we'll put this up on end. Now that this is up on end, what we can do is put pressure on this, because if we go into a barricade, we want to have that pressure. What we can do then is just hand tighten the front and rear action screw, and then we want to torque them here in just a second. Now, using my Borka kit, what I like to do is pre-tighten to about 25. So I'm going to go ahead and go to 25. Once again, keeping that pressure on the mag well, what I'm going to do is go ahead and torque this down to 25 inch-pounds. Now what I want to do is go ahead and snug these up. Now, manufacturers have different settings for these. You need to check with your manufacturer. I like to use 65 inch-pounds. That's my standard. Some guys like 45, some like 55, but anytime you take it out of the action from the chassis, you might notice a shift in your zero. So now for the final torque, I am down at 65. I'm going to go ahead and do the front first. And some people like to actually slam these down just to make sure that it's up against that recoil lug. But now I've pre-tightened a little bit more, and here we go, 65. $65 on the front, 65 on the rear. This is done. Magazine, let's check and see if it falls free. All right, guys, so just by taking that Bergara B14, we're stepping up to that open division. What I've got is I have an integrated Arca Swiss rail. It gives me good length on it. I have a full free-floating barrel. I have that base on here that I'll be able to mount my optic onto, and I have a good trigger. Let's go ahead and dry fire this to see how it feels. It's a 2-stage trigger. I'm a huge fan of 2-stage triggers, and that's pretty crisp at about a pound or so. I do have the full adjustability of the stock, whether I can use it for a junior shooter or not, but this is the XLR Element 4.0. So now that we're this far, what we can do is put a bipod on here. So bipod is going to be next. All right, so now we want to get into bipods. There are a lot of different options out there. One of the least expensive is going to be something like a Harris bipod. But you're going to need some way to attach this to your rifle. If you have a sling swivel stud, most of your Harrises are set up for sling swivel studs where it has a clamp where it will grab it. But make sure you have cant adjusting ability and possibly panning or tracking. Panning or tracking is not as important as cant. Cant is going to be extremely important for precision rimfire. This Harris does have cant, and it is adjustable on the tension on the back side, but this one's been set up for a Picatinny mount on the bottom. So while I could install a little rail on the bottom of this M-lock for a Picatinny, the Harris is not my choice for this build. Another option you're going to see quite a bit are the AccuTacs. A lot of guys run these. Great bipod, but overbuilt in my opinion. It's very clunky, it's very big, and for a junior shooter, they have to have enough strength to pull away from them to unlock and get it to lock in one of these various positions. So for a junior shooter, manipulating one of these is going to be very difficult. It does have a lot of adjustability, but guys, look how big and robust this thing is. It is very heavy, but this is an option. This is actually one that I picked up on the prize table. The Atlas, very pricey. It's going to be about $300 or so, depending on the mount that you have for it. This one, once again, is for a Picatinny. It's not a quick release either, so I probably wouldn't go with something like this. Here's an Atlas here, like a BT46, and it does have the ADM quick release mount, but once again, for a Picatinny. You can order from Area 419 the Arca Swiss adapter, and all you have to do is replace those 2 screws off of a standard Atlas. And then now you can also extend these. It's not the hardest to extend. You have to press a button to be able to get it to lock wherever you want it to. The other thing about the Atlas is you have a full 180-degree rotation here, and we can lock it at 45 or at 90. So you have a lot of different options. You do see a lot of Atlas bipods in precision rifle shooting. So all we have to do in this case is slide the Arca on here wherever we like it, tighten it up, and we are good to go with this one. So now all we have to do is mount an optic. Another option that you're going to hear the name, you'll probably see these. I'm not saying you have to have one of these, but it's the MDT, the SkyPod, probably one of the most versatile bipods you could possibly buy. However, they are extremely expensive. This is a double pull. I think it runs around $800, but it does offer an unbelievable amount of cant adjustment as well as tracking and panning. So this is an unbelievable bipod, but I don't carry it as my sole bipod. I usually have an Atlas, and then this is a backup depending on the position, because I can really get into an awkward position, one that might be limited by the bipod, but you don't have to buy this. Guys, we're talking big money. I'm not even recommending it. I'm just showing you what some of the options are out there. So now let's talk about the scope, because this is ready for an optic. This has already been tightened down. Remember, we have 30 minutes on this. So in this case, I'm going to be mounting it onto a spur mount. A spur mount gives me a lot of different options to be able to put data cards, to be able to put levels, things like that on there. So I'm going to use this one, but you could use rings if you like. This is actually not really going to be optimal for this. I don't like the height of it as much because this is a little tall. And then for whatever reason, Bergara thought it was wise to put their B right here with the logo. And the problem is I don't have a crosshatch here. So with your locking lug or your anti-recoil lug here, I can't get it centered up where I need it to go. I have to go forwards of that. So now I'm going to have some of my clamp actually hanging off of the actual scope itself, off of the rail itself. But no matter, let's go ahead and see if we can get this set up for what we're trying to show. And what we're going to do is we're going to put this on here, and then we're going to go ahead and pre-tighten it. But before we snug it up, even though it's a 22, guys, what you want to do is take this and slide it forwards, okay? I want you to notice there's a little bit of play between the recoil lug, and we'll listen. Even on a centerfire rifle, what you're wanting to do is push the scope forwards, because as the rifle recoils to the rear, you want this up against a hard stop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my tool, I'm going to go ahead and pre-torque these torque screws. I know that's aggravating, so I'll just make it not ratchet. And then we'll go ahead and torque these down. All right, so now that we have this on and we have a little bit of tension on this and the scope is forwards, Spur recommends 45 inch-pounds. This is why it's so important to have a really good torque wrench. So I have the right Torx bit, and what I'm going to do is they actually number theirs. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and tighten this up to 45. So here we go. There's pre-torquing. You're always starting inboard and working your way outboard. And I'll have this so you guys can see it. So now on this first one, we're going to go to 45. There's 45. Second one, 45. Now, once you do this, you always want to chase it, folks. Go back to number 1 because it did tighten just a little bit. 2, 3, and 4. 4 I'm not going to get crazy with because we are floating, remember. I don't have anything up underneath it, and I don't want it to crack. Now, this is one that I've made out of titanium, so I'm not worried about it. I actually cracked one of these before, so I kind of know about it. Now, as far as this height, it's not optimal. I don't like to have this much space, but for purposes of this video series, this should work just fine. I don't have any clearance issues, which is going to bring me into another topic. 90-degree throw and 60-degree throw. On the CZs, you might have a 60-degree throw where it releases right here, so it's a shorter action stroke. But on the Bergara and like on the older Voodoos, you've got the 90. You do have the 360 now, the Voodoo 360, which has a 60-degree throw. Guys, you're not going to win or lose based on your throw. It's whatever you get used to. But one of the things you do need to be aware of is if you have some type of lever, you could get in the way of your bolt knob. So make sure it's adjusted right. Make sure you have clearance so that you can work this. Make sure your junior shooter can actually lift the bolt knob. Typically, 90-degree bolt knobs will have an easier lift than a 60-degree, so just be aware of that. And that's not always the case. It's just a faster cam when it comes to unlocking. So now that we have this on here, before we ever zero this rifle, we want to make sure that it's actually true with the action. So there's a couple different ways to do this. I'm going to switch rooms. I'm going to show you how I do it, whether it's right or wrong, because a lot of the information I'm sharing, guys, might not be the preferred way. It's the way that I do it. It's the way that's worked for me. And I'm going to keep doing it that way because it seems to be working. All right, so always make sure that this is tight because you guys hear that? This is loose. This will affect your harmonics. So it's a good idea to always tighten this and maybe take a Sharpie or some type of metallic marking pencil or paint pen and mark that so that you'll know if it ever starts to become loose during a match. Because these are going to get hit quite a bit, especially moving them in and out of barricades and whatnot. So now we have everything mounted up. This rifle is almost ready to go other than zeroing. But what I'm going to show you is the way that I make sure that the scope is level with the action and the barreled action itself, okay? You cannot go on the bottom of the scope, that little gap that you're actually seeing right in here, okay? There's a ton of different ways to do this, but a lot of times manufacturers could actually have their reticle slightly canted within the tube itself. So a way to mitigate that is to actually project the reticle with a light onto the wall using a level line. However you do it is up to you, but the more errors you can cancel from the get-go, like I said, we're doing this from start to finish, and on the episode or series 3, what we'll have is we'll have Ella shooting this, getting it zeroed in at 50 yards. Before we end this series, we're going to show you how to get this level, and then we'll also talk about ammunition. All right, so in order to do this properly, you're going to need a clear section of wall, and you can use some Scotch tape or something that's not going to pull your paint off and just do a line using a level and just tape that to the wall. In my case, I use a laser level. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the chassis level. Once we get that level, then what we're going to do is shine a light in the front and project that image on the wall. All right, there's a couple different ways to do this, but we want to make sure that the chassis is level. And I'm going to have to go off the level in the chassis. We know that it's leveled up in the chassis. And so the first thing is it's level, and it's level across this way. I've just placed some rear bags back here, so it's level all the way around. On the back side, I've got a Bosch laser level, and I project a laser on the wall. We know that this is going to be level, because if I move it, you see how it auto adjusts there? And then now it's time for the flashlight. All right, guys, I know it's going to be dark, but now that we've got everything level, and we've got the laser on the back side, we're projecting the image on the wall. What we're going to do is we're going to take this flashlight and put it in the end of the objective. And what you're going to see is the reticle. All right, so if you look at the top, you'll see we're actually intersecting the line, but looking at the bottom down here, you'll see that we're not. So we've got to rotate this scope clockwise. All right, I've readjusted the scope and we are close. I got to rotate it just a little more. All right, guys, so there's a saying I learned a long time ago, and that is, if you don't have time to do it right the first time, when will you have time to do it again? So using that extra little bit to make sure that my chassis is at least level and that my reticle is level with it, then every time I check and I can see that spirit level on the chassis, that it's level, at least I'm holding the same and I'm not tracking off to the side. What we don't want to do is have that reticle, as we start adjusting it, it starts skewing off to a side because our reticle was not in line with our chassis being level, okay? So that is very important, especially at these longer distances. Once again, I'm not too thrilled about this, but this is what I had to show you guys. I'm going to make it work. Typically, I like it a little lower because if this is this high, now I'm going to have to run this cheek riser higher for Ella in order for her to shoot this. So before we close, let's talk about ammunition. All right, so now that we have that Bergara ready to go, I'm going to punch the barrel out, okay? And all I'm going to use is like Vortec Rimfire bore cleaner. I'll just make sure everything's clean in there. I'll just run a couple patches, make sure you have a bore guide, make sure you have the proper one-piece rod for that. And that just assures me that I'm starting clean and new. What we're going to need to do now is determine ammunition, because this is not hand loading. You're going to be at the mercy of the ammunition. Some of these are better than others, but I don't know what that Bergara is going to like. Also, make sure rimfire is a little different. If you ever change ammunitions, let's say I'm shooting this SK and I switch to Lapua, make sure I shoot about 15-20 rounds of this, because there is usually this wax style coating, some people call it grease, on the bullet tips. You want to get that wax from that manufacturer conditioned into the bore before you start shooting for groups. Otherwise, it's going to be all over the place. Rimfire is a completely different animal. The other thing is, you're not going to want to shoot bulk like golden bullets. Could you? You absolutely could. You could show up to a match with a big old bucket of golden bullets like this, or bring your own bullets, and you can shoot the match. It's going to be supersonic, it's going to be loud, and you're going to notice a lot of issues, more than likely. This is not going to shoot as good as most of this other stuff. Typically, what you're going to see is guys trying to keep it just at that 1100 feet per second, somewhere around 1080 to about 1115, and that should be plenty sufficient. So 40 grain subsonic ammunition. One of the most popular that you're going to see is like Lapua Center X. It's a really, really good ammunition. You'll also hear the name Ely quite a bit. This is Ely 10X. This is extremely expensive. Expect to pay upwards of $20 for a 50 round box. Lapua you can get for about $12 for a 50 count box. SK is very popular. It is owned by Lapua, and SK, they have a bunch of different brands, a bunch of different models, just like Lapua does. There's different grades of this. You've got Exacta, you've got Midas, Plus. It's really what you can get at this point right now. The Gemtech actually does okay. It's silencer ammunition. The Sigila Super Extra High Velocity would not be a good choice, but there's the old standby CCI Standard Velocity. And while this isn't bad, it is not going to be as good as some of this other stuff. If I were building that Bergara for myself, I would probably start off with something like Center X, or maybe even try the SK and the CCI just to see. I'm not even going to mess with this. I'm not going to mess with this. And you don't want to be changing lot numbers. Almost all of your boxes will have lot numbers on them. Different lot numbers will shoot differently in different rifles. So if you can get something that your rifle likes, try to get a quantity of that if possible. Otherwise, make sure you check your zeros. So where we're going to resume on Series 3 is actually taking that Bergara just like you guys saw it. I won't even shoot a round out of it. We'll get it zeroed on paper. We'll have Ella shoot some 50-yard groups, and then we'll talk about velocities and building a data chart for that to be able to shoot competition and actually do well. There's no doubt in my mind that you could take that rifle and actually finish at the top with the right shooter, because it had premium parts. It's a good setup. If you looked at the total, you've got about 1,000 in the barreled action, which that was actually a barreled action that I got for around $700. So let's say $700 for that. The Element chassis, let's say you get that for $500. So right now you're looking at what, $1,200? Then you want to add the scope. Oof, That's going to add a little bit much to it, about $2,000. The scope is always the most expensive, and then you've got the spur, and you've got the Atlas, and the Huber Concepts trigger. So this has already started to become very, very expensive, but I'm just showing you a what-if scenario. Like I said, these were parts that I had. I wanted to throw together a rifle to show you like what a good open division rifle would be. So hopefully you guys are enjoying this. I'll see you at the range on Series 3. Hopefully I can get that out in the next week or so. Really, really busy week coming up, but I appreciate each and every one of you watching. Hope you guys have a great week. Take care and have a good one.